In my prior video about forward speed of a North American fighter kite, I talked about a few things that you can do to make an existing kite a little bit faster. One of them is to shape the nose leading edge by curving it in a little bit, and the same with the trailing edge. Another thing is to use battens. Battens are simply pieces of stiffer material than the sail material that help reduce the fluttering that occurs on the sail as the kite's going through the wind. Now, as you reduce more and more of that fluttering, you're going to see an increase in the kite speed. Another thing you can do, now you can see these two kites are very similar in size and shape, although this one's smaller. And it's about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch on each wingtip shorter. If these two kites had the exact same diameter bow, this one would be much faster, because the bow, even though it's the same diameter, is shorter. And the shorter a piece of carbon fiber is of a given diameter, the stiffer it becomes. Now this is about a 30-inch piece of carbon fiber, 1.5 millimeter diameter. Now if I were to bend it here, it's much stiffer halfway than it is this way. This is very, very flexible. This is much stiffer, much stiffer. So if you have a kite plan you like, and you want the kite to go faster, one thing you can do is simply scale down the plan so that it's a little bit smaller than the original, and use the same diameter bow, but the bow would be smaller, shorter, because the kite's smaller. And that is a very important difference, and it does not take more than about 1/8 of an inch on each side to make it noticeable. So you don't have to do it a whole bunch in order to make a kite noticeably faster. And then the battens you can put on where you see the fluttering occur in the sail, and that will slow down the fluttering and increase the kite forward speed. One other thing you can do is you can stiffen the bow in your kite. Now if I wanted to use this kite, but I didn't want to make a smaller version of it, but I wanted it to go faster, here's what I would do. I would get a small diameter carbon fiber rod, smaller diameter than the bow itself, and I would just add it to the center section of the existing bow. I would thread it through my bridle lines and through the line that ties the spine to the bow, and I would align it so that it's centered directly in the center of the kite bow. And this diameter can be anything, any diameter, and if you don't have a small piece of small diameter carbon fiber to use, you can just take an existing piece of your bow and split it using a utility knife. You can split carbon fiber rods, and use half of it or part of it. I split this one, not exactly in the middle as you can see, but I could use either portion of it and attach it up here, and it would stiffen this kite bow right here. Now, after I got it lined up properly and I tied it, I would just tie it with line to the bow to make sure it stays. But it would still allow me to move it slightly to the right or left when I'm in the flying field to make sure that I had it correctly centered. Once I did that, then I would come back and I would glue it with super glue. Then you'd have a permanent, stiffer kite bow, and that would make the kite fly faster. Now, having the ability to retrieve your flying line very rapidly is going to influence the speed of your kite more than anything else. But the second most important thing, again, not the kite, the flying line itself. Now this is flying line that's very easy to grip for me, very easy, but it's a large diameter. This is braided Dacron, and it's very tightly braided, and it has very little, maybe none, but possibly some stretch, but very little. I would call it no stretch. And in a flying line for a fighter kite, you want a line that will not stretch. And why do you want it not to stretch? Well, when the wind, if you're trying to make this kite fly in the direction of the nose, whatever direction that is, the wind pressure on the sail has to deform it in order for it to take a directional path. And when that happens, the extra pressure that the wind causes by your retrieving the line will be utilized, part of that energy will be utilized to take the stretch out of the line that you're flying with, if your line has stretch. And it will do that instead of making that energy go towards the forward speed of the kite. So a stretchy line really slows the kite down. The other thing that slows it down is the diameter of the flying line. This diameter looks pretty small, but it's large, very large, compared to this. This is Power Pro fishing line. It is a higher test breaking strength. This is 40 pound. And yet the diameter is about 1/10 of what this is. I don't know if you can see these two side by side here, but it's about roughly 10%. So what's going to happen when I fly with this line not only has no stretch whatsoever, but it's very, very small in diameter, and let's say I've got 100 feet of line out, or 150. When the kite's flying, the kite is dragging 150 feet of my line. And if I'm using this line instead of this line, that 150 feet is going to weigh much less with this skinny line than it does with this line. In addition, 150 feet of this fat line is going to create more drag through the wind than this skinny line right here. This skinny line will go through almost without any drag, very little by comparison. So flying line is really important if maximizing forward speed is one of the things you want to do. But I have to warn you, and I mean warn, this is serious stuff here. If you use a line like this, a Spectra fishing line, it doesn't break, even though it says it's 40 pound test or 50 pound test or 30, whatever it says. it will hold more than double that amount before it breaks. Now, the result is this. If you have your hands gripping the line and you can grip it really well, that's great. But if your hands are damp, or if the line is so small in diameter and so slippery that you can't grip it very well, then it's going to slip through your fingers quite often if the wind is strong. And if that happens, you're going to find out that this line, being so small in diameter, is going to slice right through your fingers, right through your hands, and you will just get cut all over. And even more serious is if the line happens to get tangled up in your hands and you pull hard on the other hand, not realizing that this hand has tangled up the line, you're going to make a real bloody mess between your two hands. I'm talking from experience here, so I'm warning you, don't use this unless you're going to really grip it well. So fat line is easy to grip, so I can control it. Yeah, it's slower, no question. It's not the fastest line to use if I'm being in a competition. But what is more important to me is that I can actually hang on to it. So that's the thing. If you get a line that is so thin and slippery that you cannot hang on to it, it will cause you damage. And you're not going to have very good control over your kite under those conditions where your flying line is slipping out of your control. So you need to take all of that into consideration when you're maximizing the forward speed of your kite.